Ontario's Finance Minister is facing more criticism for going on vacation to the Caribbean despite health officials and his government urging people to stay home over the holidays. Rod Phillips left on December 13th, 5 days after the provincial legislative session ended. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick is tracking developments for us from Toronto. So Megan, what do we know and what is still unanswered about the Finance Minister's trip?
I'm going to try and go through the timeline, Andrew, of how this unfolded to get at those points. As you mentioned, we learned yesterday from Phillips's office that he did leave the country on December 13th. But originally, his office would not say where he went. We only learned that later last night when Phillips put out a second statement saying that he was on the Caribbean island of St. Barts. In his first statement earlier yesterday, Phillips said that it was a previously planned trip with his wife. Had he been aware then of the eventual shutdown that went into effect in Ontario on December 26th, he would have canceled the trip. It's not clear, Andrew, why the timing of the province-wide shutdown is relevant here, given that his government has been telling people to stay home and that health advice from all levels of government, including the federal government, is to avoid non-essential travel outside of Canada. And that has been the advice since the pandemic started in March. In his first statement, Phillips said he worked daily, digitally, while away, participating in constituency events, meetings, cabinet calls and meetings. Which then raises some questions as well. When Phillips was calling in or zooming into a cabinet meeting, was the premier, were his cabinet colleagues aware that he was doing so from outside of the country? When did Premier Doug Ford know that his finance minister was out of the country? This is a key question that has not been answered by his office, though we have asked repeatedly for that specific detail. And I'm going to circle back to Ford's reaction in a second. I want to take a look at some of Rod Phillips's social media posts, because another question for him to answer is whether he was deliberately trying to leave the impression that he was at home in Ajax, Ontario. In a tweet on December 15th, he talks about visiting small businesses to thank them for their hard work. One of the photos shows that photo was taken on December 11th, though, Andrew. Another tweet that day, there's the photo there. Another tweet that same day sort of makes it seem like he was attending an in-person funding announcement. Then on the December 17th, he posts that tweet to mark Maple Syrup Day, saying he picked some up at a local business. And on Christmas Eve, he posts this video where he wishes people a Merry Christmas and thanks people for the sacrifices that they've been making to help keep people safe. Now, last evening, Premier Ford put out a statement. He said he was extremely disappointed in his finance minister, that his decision to travel was completely unacceptable and that it won't be tolerated again. I do want to mention this is not the first time Rod Phillips has traveled outside of the country. We know he also took a trip in August. So again, his office is not providing us with details about where he went at that time. Ford's office also says that the premier did not approve of the trip, Andrew. He only learned of it after Rod Phillips left the country. But again, Premier's office not telling us when exactly he learned about it.
Yeah, we didn't even know where he was at the time, and until hours later. And then, the eggnog, the gingerbread house, the fire. It looks like his home sent out on Christmas Eve. He was not in Canada on Christmas Eve. He was on the island of St. Barts on Christmas Eve. We should make that very clear.
Yes, and I should answer just to finish the timeline.
Yeah.
Rod Phillips then also put out a statement late last night, his second statement of the day, saying he deeply regretted the decision. He's sorry for it, and he's making arrangements to immediately come back to Canada. So one of the other questions is what changed between those two statements? Because in his first statement, he did not apologize for taking this trip, and he didn't talk about cutting his trip short and coming home. But that's what we heard from him last night.
What about some reaction? What reaction are we seeing?
Lots of it. Oh, my goodness. So his constituents are reacting. We sent a camera up to his riding of Ajax yesterday, talked to some people in his riding who say this is just not fair. One man saying, I haven't visited my family in the United States. I can't afford to quarantine for 14 days when I get back. So people in his local riding not happy. The mayor of Toronto, John Tory, was just asked about this. He said it was a mistake for Rod Phillips to do this, but also expressed sympathy for his friend. He called him, saying he stands by his friends when they're in trouble and make mistakes, and that Rod Phillips will pay the price for this in terms of his credibility. And it's now a matter between him and the Premier. Toronto's Chief Medical Officer of Health, who just reported these record numbers, also commented. Here's a bit of what she said.
It's not the first time that a patient hasn't followed the advice of their clinician or their advisor. I would say this, though, it is really, really important at this time. And we know that we're going to see more discouraging numbers, as I've said. We should expect to see more discouraging numbers over the next several weeks or so.
Now, she also, in her news conference, Andrew, was encouraging people to double down on the public health guidance of staying home. She said, only go where you need to. So those were the comments from them. And then, of course, the opposition parties are reacting to this as well, slamming Rod Phillips for, they say, pretending to follow the public health guidelines, noting what he was putting out on his social media feeds while he was away. They are calling for consequences, though they didn't quite go so far as calling for his resignation or outlining what those consequences should be. But they are calling on both Rod Phillips to answer questions and also for the Premier.
All right, Megan, thank you. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick in Toronto.